Hello, friends, and welcome to this special Walking Together session. My name's Tami Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and it's my great joy to be here with Omkari Williams. Let me tell you just a little bit about Omkari. Omkari is a podcast host and certified coach working with everyday activists who see wrong in the world and want to make it right. Drawing on her background as an actor and political consultant, Omkari helps people leverage the power of story, theirs and other people's stories, to create change. And in this special Walking Together session, Omkari Williams will be speaking on activism for introverts and highly sensitive people. And I have to say, I feel that this will be applicable to me and so many people who are drawn to Sounds True and the deep inner life. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Omkari Williams.
Thank you so much, Tami. It really is a pleasure to bring this material to the Sounds True community. Let me start by saying this. Right now, the world is at a tipping point, and we need the activism of all concerned global citizens. And those words really do sum up how I feel these days. The world is in crisis in so many ways, and I feel like I have to do what I can do to make a positive impact. And for me, that means engaging in and nurturing activism. Now, my definition of activism probably isn't one you're going to find in the dictionary. For me, being an activist simply means that you are someone who takes consistent action, whether in front of the scenes or way behind the scenes, to advance a cause that you are passionate about. Also for me, the size of the action isn't the point. What matters is that you are regularly taking action to make a difference. That's my definition of activism. Let me tell you a little bit more about my background so you understand where I'm coming from with this. I grew up with a father who worked in humanitarian relief, and that juxtaposed with being a queer Black woman in the United States put the injustice in the world into high relief for me. It was what we talked about over dinner, and those conversations stick with me to this day. And those conversations and my own experiences created an unshakable commitment in me to doing what I can to bring justice where it is needed. And what I found is that it's when we start sharing our stories that the patterns that exist, the things that need fixing, become clearer. And we see that it's not just our issue. Other people are facing the same challenges. And we realize that there is power in numbers and we are not in this fight alone. So knowing that I'm really good at leveraging story to advance social justice causes has led me to take actions such as organizing abortion rights speakouts and advocating for those without the ability to speak for themselves, like children or the undocumented, to name two groups, and also to teaching others to do the same. Now, I've been working with activists for nearly a decade, and in that time, I've worked extensively with those who identify as introverted and/or highly sensitive. And that's led me to realize that introverts and highly sensitive people are an untapped resource in the fight for social justice. So that's a little bit about me and how I got here. So now let's dive in. When I say the word activist, whose face popped into your mind? Dr. King, Nelson Mandela, Gloria Steinem, Malala Yousafzai, Greta Thunberg? Any and all of those people are absolutely activists. And there's a face I would guess you did not see. And that face is your own. But what if an activist looks like you? Maybe you aren't an activist presently, but if you choose, you can definitely become one, and you can do activism your way. There's no one way of activism, and there is no one type of activist. And why we need introverts and highly sensitive people in this work so badly simply comes down to numbers. Here in the United States, as much as 55% of the population identifies as introvert. And it's my guess that that number is about the same in other Western countries around the world. And what that means is there are a lot of us, and there is tremendous power in numbers. In fact, change does not happen without a lot of people mobilizing behind the person whose face fronts a movement. And yet, our understanding of who an activist is can really be skewed by our focus on that famous face. For example, I have a friend who consistently writes postcards to voters around the country for elections ranging from school board to presidential. And she's not telling them who to vote for or what to think. She's simply encouraging them to go out and vote. She happens to be a really talented artist, and she makes her postcards little works of art. If I got one of those in the mail, I would definitely look at it. It might wind up on my refrigerator, and I would be far more likely to investigate the upcoming election in my area and then go vote. So I consider my friend to be an activist, even though you will never find her at a march. There are as many ways of being an activist as there are people on the planet. And that said, I've identified 4 archetypes of activists. How I think of the activist archetypes is this. They are where your idea of what you should do meets the reality of what you will do. We start with the headliner. They're the face of the movement. They are the people that most of us think of when we think of the word activist. Headliners are in their element in a leadership position. Taking action is what they do. Standing up and speaking to 10 or 10,000 people really feels the same to them. They are comfortable in the spotlight, and they know that this gives them the opportunity to powerfully connect with large numbers of people. Headliners have a big vision, and it's second nature for them to go out and talk about that vision. Bringing people into their cause is so satisfying for them, not for the attention they get, but for the impact that they can make. Headliners understand the burden that comes with being the face of a movement, and they accept that burden because what they are fighting for is so important to them. They know that there will likely be slings and arrows coming their way, but they're not deterred by that. They have a job to do, a cause to fight for, and people to inspire and lead. Headliners include the people I mentioned, like Greta Thunberg, Dr. King, Gloria Steinem, Angela Davis, Malala Yousafzai, Desmond Tutu, and so many others, the faces that we all identify. Next up is the producer. And I think of the producer's role very much as the role a producer would have in a movie. They are the person putting all of the pieces together. They are happiest engaging with small groups and supporting the more outgoing members of the community, and the producer wants little attention on themselves. Their emphasis is really on holding the image of the big picture so that others can play their essential roles in the common effort. They're great at seeing how all the parts fit together and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks. At the end of the day, the thing that they want most is to accomplish their community's larger goal. They will be the one just off stage, exactly where they like to be, cheering the loudest when that goal is attained. Producers are rarely well known, and that is exactly how they like it. You've almost certainly met some, but unless you were paying close attention, you might not have noticed how critical to the success of your cause they were. Next up, we have the organizer, and they are the ones making sure the various segments of the projects are parceled out and being acted on. They obviously have mad organizational skills, and their idea of a very good time is to be able to put those skills to use in a cause that matters to them. They are the person who prefers to stay behind the scenes, but organizers will step into the spotlight if need be. Their superpower is creating a detailed plan of action to move their group towards its overarching goal. They are happy working in support of the headliner and the producer. They know how valuable their ability to step into the spotlight is when the headliner needs a break. And after that, they're more than happy to go back to working behind the scenes on whatever task the producer has assigned them. So they really fill that gap between headliner and producer, keeping things on track for the headliner and translating the producer's plan into actionable steps that your community can implement. Without them, things would get messy really quickly. Organizers include Rosa Parks, who also had headliner qualities, Representative Elijah Cummings, and the mom at your PTA who creates the brilliant spreadsheet to keep everything and everyone on track for getting funding from the arts from your city council. Our final group are the indispensables, the people without whom nothing would ultimately be accomplished. Indispensables want to do the work of making social justice a reality from as far out of the spotlight as is possible, because they know that without the support of millions of people who feel just as they do, nothing changes. So there they are behind the scenes. They might be out marching with their family and friends, the friends they know and the dozens or millions who feel as they do, who they haven't personally met. Or maybe a march makes them claustrophobic, and instead they make sure that the marchers in their life have water, snacks, sunscreen, and anything else that they might need for that march. Maybe they're answering the phones, stuffing envelopes, making coffee, making posters, making their voice heard in their way by being one of the many. By bolstering the numbers of people who are committed to their cause so that those with the power to make change can't ignore them. They shun the spotlight, but that doesn't mean they aren't dedicated to change. Don't underestimate their importance. Without them and millions like them, nothing happens. Indispensables include every person at a march for climate action, women's rights, criminal justice reform, and every other social justice cause, as well as all those behind the scenes, down in the trenches, doing the unglamorous work every day. Those are people whose names we will never hear, but without whom nothing would get done. So what if an activist not only looks like you, but what if activism looks like what you can do? I just want you to hold that thought in your mind as we go through the rest of this workshop. When it comes to connecting with your particular way of activism, story is profoundly important. If you and I were sitting down together and I asked you to tell me about the social justice cause that means the most to you and how you got involved in it, you would tell me a story. You would tell me what I call your origin story. And in activist work, there are two important stories, and the origin story is first up. Your origin story is your initial motivation to activism. It's your connection to that story that keeps you going when things get hard, as they inevitably will. My origin story connects to being a child and having my mom tell me about the daughter of a coworker of hers who had cerebral palsy and how challenging her parents found it was to get care for her at the time. They found it so challenging that they ultimately founded United Cerebral Palsy, which to this day is one of the premier organizations working to help people who are affected by that condition. They were driven to that because they couldn't find what they need. So they became activists, people who never thought they would do such a thing. One of the ways that we know what's important to ourselves and to others is actually by the stories that we share. The writer Patty Dye says, "Story is the shortest distance between two people." And I love that so much because it's absolutely been my experience. While our stories vary in their specifics, our human stories are universal. Love, loss, desire, fear, hope, pain, sadness, and joy. Even when we're speaking with someone with whom we disagree on many things, or maybe even almost everything, there are common experiences that we share, and story connects us to those commonalities. Once we've made that connection, it's far harder to demonize someone, and a path to understanding has possibly been opened. It's also really important to remember that story is mutable. The stories we held as children are not necessarily the ones we still hold. We likely no longer believe in the tooth fairy because as we grew in knowledge and understanding, that story had to go away. And that's the same with all stories. As we grow in knowledge and understanding, our stories change and evolve, and the way we hold them can change and evolve. And that's actually a really great thing because that's where hope lies. Our stories dictate our behavior. And when our stories change, our behavior changes as well. We can see the importance of stories in the fight that's currently happening here in the United States around the teaching of our history of slavery and oppression. Whether children learn the true story or a sanitized version of the true story will have a profound impact on the direction of our society. I was a history major, and the stories that I heard in college and the lack of stories that I heard in college really impacted what I did and didn't understand about our history of slavery. And the gaps in my knowledge about the history of slavery in the United States definitely affected the actions I took. So as my knowledge expanded, so did my understanding and my capacity to draw lines between those ills and other societal ills that we are confronting today. Telling our true stories has tremendous impact, not only for us as individuals, but also for us as a society. While our origin stories keep us connected to our initial inspiration in our activist work by reminding us of why we care about this work, why we're doing this work in the first place, they also help us keep going because that connection will override that feeling of just anxiety and disappointment when things go wrong. And another important thing about story is the healing power that it possesses. After apartheid in South Africa, they formed Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and those were set up to allow both Black and white people to share their stories and to arrive at a place where healing was possible. Restorative justice work fills a similar role in creating an opportunity for victims of crime to tell their stories of how the wrong that was done to them impacted them, and for the perpetrators of that wrong to make amends as much as they possibly can. Another important aspect of story is not only can story help us better understand someone, we can also use story to create a shared vision of a desired future. An absolutely perfect example of that is Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. That speech is a story about the future that he envisioned. He told that story and brought millions of people into his vision for the world he wanted to see for his young children, for all of us. When we are dreaming a future, we are writing a story about what we wish to see. The more intentionally we can do this, the easier it becomes to create the world that we want. Our future stories both connect us to the work that needs to be done and can be used to draw a roadmap to help us get there. Our future stories are about the world that we want to see. And foundational in all of our work is anti-racism work. And I say that anti-racism work is foundational because in order to have a just, equitable world, we really have to tackle piece by piece, brick by brick, the impact of racism on all of our struggles. No matter your cause, anti-racism work is the basis for everything else because it is the actual structure of white supremacy that is the foundational problem leading to all other injustices. The story of white supremacy that white people, particularly men, are inherently superior to all other people and therefore deserve to have dominion over others and the earth has done and continues to do massive harm in the world. That story, which has led to huge disparities of wealth, power, and health, to name a few of its impacts, has been very successfully spread around the world. And the work of anti-racism is to combat that story and replace it with a story of equity and justice for all living things, including planet Earth herself. At bottom, the problems that we are confronted with, from climate change to inequitable distribution of wealth to the stealing of natural resources from others, all of this can be traced back to that belief that some people are more valuable than others and therefore justified in taking whatever they want from whomever they want simply because they want it. And while race is the most obvious place that we see this, the same applies to gender, ableism, ageism, and the list goes on. It is not possible to build a just, equitable world without addressing racism. If you're focused on climate justice, then it's important to acknowledge that those most immediately impacted by climate change are people of color around the world. If you're working towards gender equity, then it's impossible to ignore that women of color are most negatively impacted by gender inequities such as pay disparities and attacks on their bodily autonomy. When we look at the injustices we seek to address, we have to consider how they intersect with race in order to more fully understand the problems that we're confronting and to be better able to create solutions. At this point, your brain may well be screaming at you, there is too much to do. How can I possibly make an impact? And believe me, I get it. There is a ton to do. Let me start with this question though. What are you for? What are you for? I strongly believe that in social justice work, we have to be for something, not just against something. The things we are for are connected to our values, our stories, our dreams, and our sense of who we are in this world. Tying that to your activism is a way of staying engaged. A lot of our energy goes into what we are against. We are against racism, we're against poverty, global hunger, sexism, and all of that is right and good. But here's the problem. Broadly speaking, what we're against is a temporary high that is fueled by anger, whereas what we are for is a long-term vision that is fueled by love. Being angry all the time is an exhausting way to live. And while anger can be excellent fuel and it can be used to motivate us to get out and do something in the world, the danger of burning out is really high. Love, on the other hand, is a self-renewing resource. The more love we give, the more we have to give. For instance, I'm against children being put in cages. And when I say those words, I can feel the tightening that happens in my chest. On the other hand, I'm for all children living their lives with a sense of freedom and security and a belief that what they want to be and do is out there as a real possibility for them. And it's not going to be circumscribed by their race, their gender, or their socioeconomic circumstance. And when I say that, it's like taking a deep, calming breath. It is way more energizing for me to proceed from that place than from what I'm against. Let me give you another example. Recently, I was speaking with a friend of mine who is very successful at what she does. She's a well-known activist and she's made a name for herself in the realm of anti-racism. And we were talking about what's up next for her. And she said that she was going to be pivoting her work. And she told me about her new project. And I said, oh, I think what you're doing is moving from working on what you're against to working on what you're for. And her response was, exactly. After years of being against something, she deeply feels the need to build something. She's not taking her focus off anti-racism. She's shifting from fighting to building. And that difference will make her work more sustainable over the long haul. So we have our origin stories and we have our future stories. And one thing I want to just mention here is it's really important to remember when you're thinking about your future story, we don't have to be able to see every single detail to create a vision of the world that we want to step into. A broad vision and a willingness to adapt as we move along will get us there. Feeding one family isn't going to end world hunger, but it will make a difference for that family and it counts. So understanding that a small action and a small step can keep leading us on if we just follow the thread is really important to sustaining our activist work. Also, when we focus on what we're for, we open our access to our creativity, our joy, and our love. And those are powerful tools in building the world that we wish to live in. So we're talking about what you want to be for and what you want to do. And I want you to avoid overwhelm. So how do we do that? We use what I call my Noah's Ark rule. My Noah's Ark rule is this: when you are choosing what causes that you will work towards, I highly recommend that you pick one or at the most two causes to work on at any one time. We are human beings. Our resources of time and energy are not unlimited, so we need to use them thoughtfully and intentionally. Factor in where you are in your life. If you're a parent to young children, then you likely have far less free time than if you are single or an empty nester. If your job is demanding, then you probably have less capacity than if you're retired. Where you are in life isn't really what matters. What matters is being realistic about where you are in life so that you set yourself up for sustainability and success. You know, we can feel like there's just a ton to do and that we have to be able to participate in all of the things, but we can't. It's just not realistic. And we have to have faith that others will step in to fill the gaps. There are 8 billion people on the planet. Between us all, we've got it all covered. So choosing your one or at most two things to focus on will allow you to make the biggest impact that you can make with the time that you have and the energy you have available to you. And that doesn't mean that you have to stick with those things from now till the end of time. When a crisis arises or something comes up that really shifts your perspective, you can change. For instance, when we in the United States under the Trump administration started putting babies in cages at the southern border of the United States, I shifted my focus. I took one of my projects off of my plate and put my energy on making as much of an impact to address that situation as I possibly could. And that was what I did for months. And then once I felt like there were enough people who had stepped in, who had skills and knowledge, certainly skills and knowledge that I didn't possess, to make a difference, then I was able to go back to what I was doing in the first place. But at no time was I working on more than 2 projects. It simply wasn't going to be effective for me. And my ultimate goal is to make the biggest impact that I can make with the time and the skills and the energy that I have available to me. Now, something that can make confining ourselves to 1 or 2 areas of focus at a time challenging is that we live in a culture of really, it's a toxic culture of big impact and perfectionism. We even have expressions like go big or go home. And, you know, sure, we would all like to end world hunger. But again, if you feed one person, if you feed one family, doesn't that count? That whole notion that everything we do has to be huge keeps us from doing anything at all, because essentially it tells us that our small contribution does not matter. And I am here to say that that is absolutely not the case. Western culture tells us so many ways that a little thing doesn't make a difference. But that's just simply not true. If you think about it this way, if every person fed one hungry person a day, would we solve world hunger? We probably would. So it's not the individual actions, it's the accumulation of all those actions. And we need to remember that as we're doing our work. It's our individual action, but it is layered on top of the actions of so many other people who are also doing their part in the world. And we have to have faith in that whole process of communal mutual aid to make a difference. Especially, I want to say this for introverts and HSPs, it's a really disheartening message to be told that we have to make a big impact, because it really does tell us that who we are and what we can offer is insignificant. And it's a lot of reminding ourselves. It's a lot of reminding ourselves that that is not true, that is required to overcome that message that we hear day in and day out. So I just want you to remember there is value in small actions. Not only are small actions really positive for the recipient, they are positive for us because they help us build a habit of activism. Also, small actions are sustainable. When we overburden ourselves, we burn out and either stop doing anything at all, or we become less effective at what we are doing. A sustainable practice increases our impact because as we become better at what we do, we also expand our capacity to do more through practice. And then the last thing I want to say on this subject is that the way we elevate those whose accomplishments are huge actually does a disservice to those taking the everyday actions that matter so profoundly. Greta Thunberg, without the millions of people advocating behind her, would still be nothing more than a kid who spent her Fridays, instead of being in school, sitting outside the Swedish parliament. It is because of the millions of people that she has been able to motivate into action around climate change that we know who Greta Thunberg is and that her voice is so powerful in the world. Another thing that comes in between introverts and highly sensitive people and making a difference in the world is fear of making a mistake. That perfectionism piece rears its ugly head. We are told that if we can't do something exceptionally well, we kind of shouldn't bother. But here's the thing with that. No one's great at everything from the get-go. We all learn through trial and error, through practice. And when we make a mistake, if instead of being told that we've made this mistake and we should just stop, what if we were told, great, learn from the mistake and move on. Learn from the mistake and not let it become an obstacle. I can speak for myself and say that introverts have a tendency to obsess over the things that we think we've done wrong. I still can think of things from literally decades ago that when they come up in my mind, I cringe. It's not helpful. I'm constantly reminding myself, you are not perfect. You are learning as you go. Keep learning, keep moving. When you make a mistake, make amends as best you can, and don't let that stop you. Because if my fear of making a mistake becomes overwhelming, then I won't even step into the arena of activism. I will simply stay home and do nothing because that's the safest route. But safe doesn't change the world, and the world needs your help to change. So let me talk a little bit about this. When we can acknowledge our mistakes, what we're really doing is opening space in community, because it's in community that our mistakes show up. We say the wrong thing to someone, or we do something wrong and someone mentions it to us, or hopefully doesn't really call us out for it, but that happens sometimes too. But it's in community that we learn how to navigate those processes. So it's important that we pay attention to that and that we model that willingness to be open, not just for ourselves, but also for those who are working with us and coming up behind us. I want now to talk a little bit about probably my favorite piece in this whole thing, and that is the subject of legacy. I even love the word legacy. It is such a rich word and it evokes so many things. And the thing I love most about legacy is that we create our legacies by the actions that we take each and every day. When I think about legacy, the way I think about it is, what is it that I would want people to say about me after I'm gone from this world? And I wonder whether I'm doing the things that will make them say that. And I hold my actions up to that standard of what I would like people to say about me and see if it's matching that. And if it's not, then I can make adjustments. Am I doing the things that will make the people I care about say the things I would love for them to say about me after I'm gone? What's the legacy that you're creating? Are you intentionally creating something, or are you creating something without thought? Because regardless, we are always creating a legacy. We are always leaving a legacy. And I'm not saying that you should spend every minute of every day thinking about your legacy. What I am saying is that keeping your legacy in the forefront of your mind will guarantee that the actions that you take on a regular basis are in alignment with your values and goals. If you determine that the legacy you want to leave is one of kindness in the world, then you're not going to go out and treat people poorly. You will make a point of treating people with decency and respect, even and especially when they disagree with you or are unkind to you. If you're looking at the legacy that you're building and it isn't the one that you wish to be leaving, what are the changes that you would have to make in order to leave the legacy that you would like? What are the things you would have to do differently? What are the different questions you might have to ask? What are the answers that you give yourself about what you need to do? And are those answers realistic? I mean, if you're talking about being kind, no one's kind 100% of the time. And to aspire to that is to fall into the trap of perfectionism and sabotage yourself. But if you aspire to being kind and you can look at the end of each day and say, yeah, I did pretty well today with that. Here's where maybe I could have been a little nicer about this or a little more thoughtful about that. And you make progress and you don't stop yourself by feeling like I'm not perfect. I'm never going to get this right. So I'm just going to quit. This is not about guilt or shame or comparison. This is about feeling satisfied at the end of most days, not every day. That's not going to happen. And also at the end of your life. There's always going to be unfinished business. But if we live in order to be what my friend Layla calls good ancestors, then there is a richness and a satisfaction to our days, no matter what happens in the world outside of us. So, for all the introverts and highly sensitive people out there, what I want you to take away from this workshop is you have the capacity to make an impact in the world. You have the capacity to change something for the better. And it doesn't have to be an enormous thing. It just has to be your thing. It has to be your little contribution, which will be added to my little contribution and the contributions of the people around us, so that over time, we do make the world a better place, that over time, we shift the needle towards justice and liberty for all people. At the beginning of this, I asked, what if an activist looks like you? What I'd like to end by saying is that an activist does look like you if you decide that that is so. And to quote my friend, ocean activist Taraha Sriram, she says this: activism is a way of breathing life into our values. It has been so much fun talking with everyone. And Tami, let's go. What do you have to talk to me about?
Well, thank you, Omkari. I want to begin by being vulnerable here with you in this notion, the very first idea of what is an activist. And you mentioned taking consistent action. And I thought to myself, well, taking consistent action with a social cause in mind. And the vulnerable part for me is, I've devoted my whole life to disseminating spiritual wisdom,
Mhm.
thinking that spiritual wisdom will really help. And yet I've felt there's something, well, you're not really being an activist, Tammy. Not really, not by any kind of traditional sense of the word. So I'm curious, in your view, what qualifies as consistent action towards making change in the world? What doesn't qualify?
Okay. First off, I'm going to say that I deeply believe that spiritual practices, that spiritual work, that a spiritual mindset is incredibly important in changing the world. I mean, it's one of the ways that we actually know we're on a righteous path is if we are aligned with the teachings of all of the major traditions, because they all agree on the basics of being kind to one another, of caring for one another. So I actually think that that is a way of activism. I dispute the idea that those things are separate. Uh, and as I said, 8 billion people, everyone gets to do their thing their way. And if we look at the accumulation of people doing their thing, someone's covering everything. So I feel like that split between activism and spirituality is kind of a false dichotomy. It's just not how I see it. I think that in the ideal world, we bring our spirituality into our activism. It informs how we treat other people in the world. It informs the decisions that we make. It informs our understanding of where we are on the right path and where we might have gotten down a side road. Does that
It do
answer your?
it does, and I think what it brings up is this notion of sometimes if we are engaging in comparison of some kind, and the thing that we love looks different than a traditional form of activism. Of course, I care about the environment. Of course, I care about other issues, but actually, what I love, and this could be something for somebody else, who knows what it is maybe a certain form of woodworking or a craft or an art form or something related to parenting. Like that's actually what I love. Is that okay? Can that be my origin story? Can that be my activism? Can I find a way? What would make it in your paradigm fit?
A couple of things. First, I'm going to say don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. So your internal experience and is one thing, and someone else, what they're doing out in the world, looks like a certain kind of thing, and it may look like the thing we've been trained to call activism, but we don't know what their internal experience is, and we don't know what your internal motivation is. So I really advise people to not compare. Just first off, follow your heart, follow your belief system, and do the thing that calls to you. So last week I saw this thing on Twitter, and it was this young boy in the UK who I don't know, maybe 13 or 14, I forget. He is a very, very talented woodworker, and he had a little tiny following on Instagram, like 6 people, and his friends were making fun of him. So his dad went on Twitter and said, "Would you give my kid a follow?" And being Twitter, hundreds of thousands of people went on Instagram and started following this kid. And it was amazing. So this young man then proceeded to make a bowl, this beautiful bowl, and he carved in strips, and that one was blue and one was yellow for the Ukrainian flag. And he put that bowl up for auction and raised the last I looked, it was over 50,000 pounds in money that would go to save the children to help Ukrainian kids. That kid is an activist. He's however old he is, and he's an activist. And he's only doing what he loves to do, but he's taking his passion and applying it to something that's important to him. And that's really what activism is. It's like, what are you passionate about? How can you use that to make a difference in the world? It doesn't have to look like what anyone else is doing. If your internal goal is to make the world better and this is your way of doing it, that's fantastic. Keep doing that. Don't second guess, don't judge, don't compare. Do what you can do and trust that your contribution is going to matter to someone, and that every little bit does truly help.
What would you say to that person who's listening, who's having trouble identifying their one or two Noah's Ark causes so that they can have a genuine origin story and get going?
I would say that it's probably right there. The things that we're passionate about are right there. Sometimes we forget what they are because they may not be present in our everyday lives. But if you think about the things that always get you angry, right there is probably connected to an origin story that you have. For me, injustice always just pushes me. I don't care where I see it. If I see someone being unjust to someone else, it always makes me really angry. And I'm very likely to say something. I'm very likely to not keep my mouth shut about that. And I think that if we look at the places that trigger us either for good or, not, being angry isn't necessarily so great, but if we look at those places, we can find that origin story. We can say, oh, yeah, you know what? I've always been like this. This thing has always bugged me, or this thing has always excited me, and I've always wanted to share it with the world.
Do you encounter people, Omkari, who have like five causes that they're
Oh,
really
yeah.
passionate about, and they just say to you, look, I don't buy your Noah's Ark thing?
I encounter people who have multiple causes they're passionate about, and generalists is how I think of them. And generally speaking, they will even say, yeah, there's only so much I can do in any of them. So, you know, I'm not the boss of them. Everybody gets to do what they want to do. But I feel like if we want to make the most impact we can with the time and resources we have available, that focusing is really important. And as I said, it's not like you focus once and you can never change your thing. You can change it anytime you want. But how much time do you really have? How much energy do you really have? If you feel like you legitimately can make a difference on five different things at once, I go for it. I just don't think that's most of us. I think most of us do better when we boil it down to one or two things and keep our focus. And partly also because it allows us to build community, especially for introverts. I mean, if you're an extrovert, maybe five things is doable because building community for you is like breathing. But if you're an introvert and building community is a much more tenuous process, then five different groups is going to feel overwhelming. Whereas one group of people that you can build a community with and get to know well and consistently feels much more manageable.
Now, I want to talk to you about this notion of the future story behind the cause that you care about. And I'm going to do this by sharing for a moment that for me, I have my two big causes. One is, and now I feel you've given me permission to claim it. One has to do with spiritual awakening as broadly, widely, worldwide as possible. And the other has to do with creating conscious businesses, businesses that are actually just, that lift people up. And when I create a future story, about conscious business, and this would be businesses operating worldwide very differently than they are today. There's a part of me that feels Pollyanna-ish, naive, like to get from here to there, like, oh my God, probably won't happen in my lifetime. I want it to happen in my lifetime. I could paint that vision. I could claim that vision. I could put it out. And then another part of me is like, yeah, dreamer, come on, what are you, that's crazy talk. So I'm curious what you think about that in terms of our future story.
Here's what I'll say to that. I would love to see the end of racism in my lifetime. That is not going to happen. And that does not absolve me of the responsibility to do what I can do to push that work of justice forward. So I think of it in that larger sense of what I want and what I'm going to get are not necessarily the same thing, but I'm still responsible to do the work. So for you, with your conscious business model, it's this is your your baby. This is your thing. And your job is to raise it up as far as you can and then pass it on to someone to keep moving it forward and keep expanding. It's sort of like you're going to get it to a certain point and then maybe you're going to send it off to someone and they'll take it to college. They'll get it, and then they'll get it through its PhD or whatever. It's not up to us whether our goal is accomplished. There are so many forces beyond our ability to impact that will determine whether our goal is accomplished in our lifetime. We don't have that power, unfortunately, but we do have the power to do the thing that we can do to move this project, whatever it may be, forward. And that is our responsibility. The end
I'm
line
with you.
isn't.
I'm with you on that. The question I guess I have is this notion of telling the future story, what we want to see. So for example, to take your future story of a world that is not uh, a world where we find the kind of racism that we find today, that
Mhm.
world. How do you feel about telling that story, painting that picture, describing that, saying, this is the dream I have? How does that feel to you when you do that?
It feels amazing because even though I know I'm not going to see it, maybe my 1-year-old nephew will get close to seeing it, or maybe his kids. It feels empowering because again, it's the what am I for? I'm trying to live into a story of what I'm for because that keeps me doing the work, that keeps me in motion. And I feel like there's a way in which our society we want a result and we want it right now. And we're not very good at delayed gratification, much less the idea that we're not going to get gratification at all. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we have that attitude because there's something really deeply satisfying about creating this piece of the picture and creating our piece of the picture so beautifully that someone else can see it and take it and expand on it. I mean, Dr. King even said, I may not get to the mountaintop with you, but he still had that vision and he shared that vision, and that vision has inspired people for the last 50 years. So I think of it that way. I think of it as our responsibility is to do our part. And it's also our joy. We get to do our part, and that's our joy because we're working on the thing that we care about. We're working on the thing that we can see, and sharing that vision and getting other people excited about that vision and bringing them in and having them say, oh, yeah, this is worth working on. This will make a difference in the world. So, uh, did I answer that for you?
You did.
Okay,
You
cool.
did. Thank you.
You're
Now,
welcome.
there was a moment in your talk where I sat up a little bit and I was like, Tammy, you really need to hear this. This is important for you to hear. And it was when you were talking about how it's not possible to address an issue without addressing racism, how racism is associated with that cause, and being an active anti-racist. This is what I heard
Yes,
as you do that work. And I thought, huh, putting that right in the center like that, you have
yes.
to center that. And I wanted to hear more about that, why and how you've come to see that as so critical.
Yeah. You know, the whole problem of the structure of white supremacy is that it's been so well perpetuated over the centuries that we don't even notice where it impacts our abilities to make change. We don't even notice where it will circumscribe someone's options often. And if we don't see all the tentacles, if we don't see the intersections, because that's what we're really talking about, we're talking about the intersections. Where does white supremacy intersect with climate change? So, right now, if you live in the developing world on an island in the Pacific, you're in trouble because the waters are rising and people have had to leave their islands because climate change is making their homes that they have been homes for thousands of years uninhabitable. And those are primarily people of color because those are people who are considered to be less important than. If you are talking about women's rights, right now we're having this whole incredibly frustrating conversation in the United States about a woman's right to bodily autonomy. Can she decide whether or not to have an abortion? And that we're having this conversation again, much less still, is incredibly frustrating, but it goes back to white men believing that they are responsible for women to the extent that they get to tell women what to do with their own bodies. Women are still considered by an really unfortunate percentage of the male population to be property. And there's no way that you can take property and racism out of that whole equation. There's no way that you can separate those two things. So the whole hierarchy, so you have white people and you have white men at the top, and then you have white women, and then you have Black men, and then you have Black women, and that whole structure completely perpetuates this idea that people are not equal. And so I don't see how you take those pieces out of it and take people's opportunity to determine their own lives and make their own choices and live with dignity in their own homes without having someone come in and say, I like this land that is India. I think we're going to just come here and we're going to hang out here until it becomes inconvenient for us to do so. But on the way out the door, we're going to partition this land into two countries and make it so that those two countries are now fighting each other for the last almost century. It's just, you can't separate it out. You just can't. If you look back, you can see that fundamental belief in the superiority of some people as the underlying problem in all of the things that we're confronting now. And you have to hold that piece in your mind so that when you're looking at whatever your particular problem is, you can hold that piece and say, where does this impact it? And what are the steps I'm going to need to take to disentangle from that as we move forward?
Thank you for that, Omkari, for that clarity. Now, you ended your talk on this notion of legacy and talking about what it might mean to grow into a good ancestor. And that's powerful to me, that idea. And as a final question to you, I'd love to know what makes you feel like, I'm becoming a future good ancestor. I can feel it. What makes you feel that way?
Wow, there's a question. I think honestly, just the fact that I've chosen this particular work to do, and I am deeply committed to it. And I am deeply committed to bringing introverts and highly sensitive people into the realm of activism, because I so believe that we need the numbers of people that are identified by those terms. We just need them. We need them in the fight. We need them doing their part to make the world better. And so for me, I feel like that's the role I'm here to play, because I am what I consider to be a socially adept introvert. I am very introverted, but I also am very comfortable standing up in front of people and talking about the thing I do. So I feel like I have this opportunity to sort of bridge those two worlds in a unique way. And that if I do that consistently, if I do it with great dedication and with great love, then then I will be a good ancestor. And it's an ongoing process. It's not like I feel like, oh, I'm going to be a good ancestor because I'm doing this work now. No, I feel like every single day I am making choices that I hope will make me a good ancestor. And it's my North Star. It keeps me going, and it's really gratifying.
Thank you so much, Omkari Williams, for being part of our walking together world and walking together with Sounds True. Thank you.
Thank you.